She ran, not away, toward the window. The soldiers were already at the gate. She had maybe 60 seconds, maybe less. Her bare feet hit the stone stairs two at a time. Up, past the smell of oil lamps and dried fish, past the sound of her mother's sleeping breath, all the way to the flat clay rooftop where the flax lay, drying in golden rows under a sky full of indifferent stars. Behind her, downstairs, two men pressed themselves into the shadows and said nothing. They didn't need to. They could hear it too. Boots, iron on cobblestone. A dozen soldiers, maybe more, moving information through the dark streets of Jericho. She had perhaps the length of a held breath to decide the rest of her life. The city knew something was wrong. Word had arrived that morning. Two strangers had been spotted near the city gate. Strangers with strange eyes. Israelite eyes? The king's men were already moving through the streets, their torches cutting the darkness like a blade. House by house, door by door, getting closer. Upstairs, on a rooftop smelling of drying flax, the woman pressed her fingers to her lips and listened. Boots on cobblestone, getting closer, closer. Below her window, the entire Israelite army was camped across the Jordan River, 2 million strong, waiting for a sign. The mightiest force the ancient world had ever seen, held back by a river and a god with a plan no general had been briefed on. And in her hand, coiled like a secret, was a scarlet thread. A city that was already afraid, long before those two spies ever appeared at her door. Jericho was a city drowning in dread. The stories had been arriving for 40 years, carried on the lips of traders, refugees, and shell-shocked. Soldiers who had watched things happen that no soldiers' training had prepared them for. An entire sea split clean down the middle. An army swallowed by water that then closed back over itself like a curtain. 40 years of desert wandering that should have killed 2 million people and didn't. And then, more recently, the Amorite king, Sihon, Og, gone, retreated, not negotiated with, gone. Wiped off the map by people who claimed their God had told them to walk through the wilderness until the time was right. The time, it seemed, was now. Word had reached Jericho like a cold wind off the Jordan. Israel had crossed over. They were camped in the plains of Moab, just across the river. 2 million people, livestock, children. Priests carrying a golden box called the Ark of the Covenant, said to carry the very presence of the God who made the world. Jericho's walls were thick, 6 feet in some places, wide enough to build houses into. But no one in the city felt safe behind them. Not anymore. I know that the Lord has given you this land and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Joshua chapter 2 verse 9. This was not the speech of a frightened woman guessing at what her neighbors felt. This was a precise report. Rahab had been watching. She had listened at markets. Read the faces of merchants who came through her door and left in a hurry. She had noticed which families had packed their carts and gone. North in the night, she had seen the king's soldiers patrolling, with the twitchy energy of men who had already surrendered in their imaginations and were just waiting for the body to catch up. And she had done something unusual in the middle of all that fear. She had thought, carefully, alone, about which side of history she wanted to be on. Joshua had sent the two men with a single instruction. Go, look over the land, especially Jericho. How they ended up at Rahab's door, the Bible does not explain. Perhaps her house in the city wall was a natural entry point for strangers. Perhaps it was the invisible hand of a God who had already chosen her before she had chosen him. Either way, they came, and she opened the door. They had barely gotten inside when the intelligence reached the king. Someone had seen, someone had talked, and the message delivered to the palace was urgent. Israelite spies inside the city, inside Rahab's house. Tonight, the king did not deliberate. He sent officers immediately with one order: bring them out now. But Rahab had already moved. She had taken the two men upstairs and buried them under stalks of drying flax, sheaf after golden sheaf pressed over their bodies. On the flat rooftop, while the city below began to move with soldiers, then she came back downstairs, smoothed her expression like pressing wrinkles from linen, and opened the door to the king's officers. What she said next was a lie. The Bible does not hide this. She told the officers the men had come, that she had not known who they were, and that they had left just before the city gate closed at dusk. Go after them quickly, she said. You may catch up with them. The officers believed her. They left. The city gate shut with a boom that echoed off the walls, and the city of Jericho sealed itself in for the night, with two Israeli spies still on the roof. Scholars have debated Rahab's deception for centuries. Was it right? Was it wrong? What is settled is this: Hebrews 11 and James to do. Not commend her for the lie. They commend her for the faith that produced the action. She chose, at personal risk of execution, to protect the people of God because she believed, truly believed, that their God was real. The deception was the shape her courage took in that particular moment. The root of it was something deeper, something the New Testament calls faith. When the soldiers had gone and the sound of hooves had faded into the distance, Rahab climbed back to the roof. She crouched beside the men hidden in the flax and spoke to them in the dark. And what came out of her mouth stunned them. This was not a business transaction. This was not a woman negotiating payment for services rendered. This was a confession of faith so precise and so complete that it could have come from the lips of Moses himself. I know that the Lord has given you this land, for we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Joshua chapter 2 verses 9 to 11. Read that last line again slowly. The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. This is not a woman saying, your God is stronger than our gods. This is not a frightened person hedging her bets with the winning army. This is pure, unfiltered monotheism from a Canaanite woman raised in a culture of Baal worship and sacred poles and stone idols. She had looked at all the evidence history had left lying around: the parted sea, the obliterated kings, the uncanny preservation of a desert nation, and she had arrived at a conclusion that the king of Jericho, with all his soldiers and thick walls, had not. There is only one God, and he is not on Jericho's side. She had done her theology alone, in the dark, without a priest or a prophet. She had reasoned her way to the God of the universe using only the reports of what he had already done, and she had bet her life and the lives of everyone she loved on it being true. Then she made her request. She had saved their lives. She asked them to save hers, not just hers, her father, her mother, her brothers, her sisters, all who belonged to them. Rahab was a woman who thought in families. Whatever grace came to her, she wanted it wide enough to cover everyone she loved. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Joshua chapter 2 verses 12 to 13. The spies agreed without hesitation. Our lives for your lives, they said. If she kept their secret, they would keep their oath. But there was one condition, one sign she must display when the time came. And it was the condition that would make this moment echo through for 1,000 years of history. Tie this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and bring your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. Anyone who goes outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own head. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. Joshua chapter 2 verses 18 to 19. A scarlet cord, crimson thread in a window. If you know the story of the first Passover of lamb's blood, painted on doorposts so that death would pass over every house marked with red, then your breath catches here, as it should. There is a signature running through Scripture, and it is written in the color of blood, a mark of red, a household preserved, a family that should have been destroyed walking out alive because someone believed God and acted on it. The gospel of grace is quietly hiding in this window, waiting for those with eyes to see it. She lowered them down through the window by a rope. Because her house sat inside the outer wall of the city, she could drop them straight down the outside face of Jericho's defenses, and they disappeared into the night, telling her to hide in the hills for 3 days before returning to the city. She watched until they were gone. Then she turned back to the window and tied the scarlet cord. Right then, that same night, not when the army arrived, not when she heard the war drums. Now, faith that waits for visible proof before it acts is not quite faith. She tied the cord in the dark, while Jericho slept unaware around her. The spies returned to Joshua with a report burning with certainty. The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us. Joshua mobilized the entire nation of Israel. Priests, soldiers, women, children, livestock moved toward the Jordan River, and the Jordan, which was at flood stage, stopped. The priests carrying the ark stepped into the edge of the water, and the river piled up in a heap upstream, and 2 million people crossed over. God was making a point he clearly enjoyed making, and as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in the Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. Joshua chapter 3 verse 13. Then came God's battle plan for Jericho, and it sounded, to any military strategist, like absolute madness. No catapults, no siege towers, no battering rams. Instead, march around the city once a day for 6 days. Priests carry the ark. Rams' horns blow. The army marches in complete silence. Return to camp on the 7th day. Circle the city 7 times. Have the priests blow a long blast. And have every person in the army shout with everything they have. Imagine what Rahab felt during those 6 days. Each morning at dawn, the distant thunder of approaching feet. A sound like nothing Jericho had ever heard. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers marching in. Disciplined silence broken only by the eerie wail of rams' horns. They circled the city once, and then nothing. They went back to camp. The city did not know whether to laugh or weep. The next morning, they came again. Again, the horns. Again, the silence. Again, they left without so much as drawing a sword. And every day, Rahab sat by her window in the wall. Her father, her mother, her brothers, her sisters pressed inside the room with her, the door barricaded as instructed, and she watched the scarlet cord swing in the morning breeze. She had gathered everyone she loved into one room and staked there, lives on a promise made in their dark bye to foreign strangers. That is what faith looks like when it has a body. The 7th day, dawn had barely broken when Israel began to move. And this time, they did not stop after one circuit. They circled Jericho once, twice. The ground began to feel different beneath their feet, as though the earth itself knew something was about to change. 3 times, 4. The priest's horns were constant now, a sound like a wound in the air. 5 times, 6. The entire army of Israel, every soldier, every priest, orbiting this walled city for the 7th time while its inhabitants stood on the walls above and watched in confused, trembling silence. 7. The final circuit was completed. The priests raised their rams' horns, one long, shattering, heaven-splitting blast. And when the trumpets sounded, the army shouted. And at the sound of the trumpet, when the men gave a loud shout, the wall collapsed. So everyone charged straight in, and they took the city. Joshua chapter 6 verse 20. The walls of Jericho did not crack and then crumble slowly over an hour. They fell flat, straight down, all of them, all except one section. Archaeologists excavating the ancient ruins of Jericho have found evidence of a catastrophic collapse. Mud brick walls, fallen outward flat, forming a ramp that the soldiers could walk straight up, and a section of the north wall that did not fall, where mud brick houses had been built into the outer wall. One section standing in the ruin of a city, one window, and in it, a thread the color of blood. Joshua had given his orders before the march began. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab, the prostitute, and all who are with her in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies we sent, the same 2 men whose lives she had, hidden under flax ran through, fire and dust and screaming, directly to that thread, and pulled her out. her father, her mother, her brothers, her sisters, everyone she had gathered into the room. All of them walked out of the rubble of Jericho alive. But Joshua spared Rahab the prostitute, with her family and all who belonged to her, because she hid the men Joshua had sent as spies to Jericho, and she lives among the Israelites to this day. Joshua chapter 6 verse 25. The story does not end at Jericho. It never does when God is the author. Rahab settled among the people of Israel, not as an outsider looking in through a window, but as a daughter, as one of them. She married an Israelite man named Salmon. She bore a son named Boaz. You may know Boaz, the generous landowner who spread his cloak of protection over a Moabite widow named Ruth, and said, "All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." Noble character, learned, perhaps, at his mother's table. Boaz and Ruth had a son named Obed. Obed had a son named Jesse. Jesse had a son named David, the shepherd king, the psalmist, the man described as a man after God's own heart. And 1,000 years after Rahab hung a scarlet cord in her window, a young woman named Mary would carry in her womb the Son of God, a son whose genealogy Matthew traced carefully, name by name, all the way back through David, through Jesse, through Obed, through Boaz, through Rahab. The prostitute of Jericho is in the bloodline of Jesus Christ. Matthew chapter 1 verse 5 names her without apology, without a footnote, without embarrassment. She is there, the woman whose city fell around her while she sat trusting a promise in the dark. She is there, sewn into the genealogy of the Savior of the world. By faith Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had given a friendly welcome to the spies. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 31. She stands in Hebrews 11, the hall of faith, shoulder to shoulder with Abraham, Noah, and Moses, not because she was perfect, not because her profession was noble, not because she never lied, but because when the evidence of a living, God came to her door in the shape of two tired, wet-footed spies. She opened it, and she believed, and she acted, and she tied the cord. Grace has always had a particular affection for walls. It finds the one window no one else is watching. It ties a thread the color of the price it is willing to pay. It keeps its oath when every stone around it is falling, and it saves families that the city had already forgotten. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above, and on the earth below. The words of Rahab, Joshua chapter 2 verse 11.